Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to finish up 173.1 with paragraph 11 and continue on from there.
This cleansing of the temple discloses the Master's attitude toward commercializing the practices of religion, as well as his detestation of all forms of unfairness and profiteering at the expense of the poor and the unlearned. This episode also demonstrates that Jesus did not look with approval upon the refusal to employ force to protect the majority of any given human group against the unfair and enslaving practices of unjust minorities who may be able to entrench themselves behind political, financial, or ecclesiastical power. Shrewd, wicked, and designing men are not to be permitted to organize themselves for the exploitation and oppression of those who, because of their idealism, are not disposed to resort to force for self-protection or for the furtherance of their laudable life projects.
Right. We basically see that in the scriptures many, many times where the few of the good must stand up to defend the many. And the Lord did this as an example. It's interesting that he did this right at the end of his life. It kind of shows a little bit how far the Lord will go before he does resort to any kind of force or resistance to evil. It's cumulative in the sense that he tries to get the people to stand for themselves, to defend themselves, to do what's right for themselves. But when he came up against something towards the end of his life that was entrenched in finances and politics and ecclesiastical power, he realized that those three things combined together were providing safety for these people to exploit others. That's what he's calling us to do. If we see these same kind of things enshrined in protecting those that should be looking out for their fellow man and women's best interest and are not, and they're protected by these institutions, we need to call them out, even to the point of force if necessary, but we need to try everything else along the way before we resort to that. As Christ did, he was always pointing out the hypocrisies of the scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites. Only at the end of his life, then, after he realized the people just would not do anything, did he realize he could do something small. And it wasn't much. I mean, he didn't go around beating up people and those kind of things. He just took away their cattle and the sheep and everything else by letting them out and creating such a din that the business was stopped for the day. Let's keep going.
2. Challenging the Master's authority. On Sunday, the triumphal entry into Jerusalem so overawed the Jewish leaders that they refrained from placing Jesus under arrest. Today, this spectacular cleansing of the temple likewise effectively postponed the Master's apprehension. Day by day, the rulers of the Jews were becoming more and more determined to destroy him, but they were distraught by two fears which conspired to delay the hour of striking. The chief priests and the scribes were unwilling to arrest Jesus in public for fear the multitude might turn upon them in a fury of resentment. They also dreaded the possibility of the Roman guards being called upon to quell a popular uprising. At the noon session,
You'll notice that these people who are in power fear you more than anything else. They did in Christ's time, they do now. That's why they act with such reckless disregard for the law, because they must protect their power at all costs, but they are cowards in the end. They do not have any backbone to stand by what they want done, because they know that it's without principle. So all you have to do is stand up and say no sometimes. Sometimes it takes more than that. But in the end, saying no is the first step.
of the Sanhedrin, it was unanimously agreed that Jesus must be speedily destroyed, inasmuch as no friend of the Master attended this meeting. But they could not agree as to when and how he should be taken into custody. Finally, they agreed upon appointing 5 groups to go out among the people and seek to entangle him in his teaching or otherwise to discredit him in the sight of those who listened to his instruction. Accordingly, about 2:00, when Jesus had just begun his discourse on the liberty of sonship, a group of these elders of Israel made their way up near Jesus, and interrupting him in the customary manner, asked this question: "By what authority do you do these things? Who gave you this authority?" It was altogether proper that the temple rulers and the officers of the Jewish Sanhedrin should ask this question of anyone who presumed to teach and perform in the extraordinary manner which had been characteristic of Jesus, especially as concerned his recent conduct in clearing the temple of all commerce. These traders and money changers all operated by direct license from the highest rulers, and a percentage of their gains was supposed to go directly into the temple treasury. Do not forget that authority was the watchword of all Jewry. The prophets were always stirring up trouble because they so boldly presumed to teach without authority, without having been duly instructed in the rabbinic academies and subsequently regularly ordained by the Sanhedrin. Lack of this authority in pretentious public teaching was looked upon as indicating either ignorant presumption or open rebellion. At this time only the Sanhedrin could ordain an elder or teacher, and such a ceremony had to take place in the presence of at least 3 persons who had previously been so ordained. Such an ordination conferred the title of rabbi upon the teacher, and also qualified him to act as a judge, binding and loosing such matters as might be brought to him for adjudication.
It's interesting to see how this has gone even further in many Christian churches than even the rabbis were taking upon themselves. That position of authority, that position of always being right, that position of doing what they want no matter what, or facing the consequences. And that's the whole purpose of the prophets, was to try to shake things up and wake the people up to their complacency, to falling asleep, as it were, in the chains of hell. And I see it like this, that we have the same problems today as they did then. We are no different. We love to wrap ourselves in that cloak of authority and pretend that we have rights above others, or at least we have additional authority to act in their lives, even to the point of taking away privileges and taking away things that are not ours to take. Happens all the time. It's wrong. In the case of the Jews, they'd love to go out and get the people stirred up so they'd stone the prophet to death. In our day, they are just excommunicated or pushed out or rejected by the people because a few in authority cannot even address the issues and questions that these prophets, that these men who are inspired of God, come and say, hey, we need to do this, we need to do that. So instead they will just get rid of them. Not necessarily to stone them, but excommunicate them, push them out, drive them out, etc. Let's move on.
The rulers of the temple came before Jesus at this afternoon hour, challenging not only his teaching but his acts. Jesus well knew that these very men had long publicly taught that his authority for teaching was satanic, and that all his mighty works had been wrought by the power of the prince of devils. Therefore did the Master begin his answer to their question by asking them a counter-question. Said Jesus, "I would also like to ask you one question, which, if you will answer me, I likewise will tell you by what authority I do these works. The baptism of John, whence was it? Did John get his authority from heaven or from men?" And when his questioners heard this, they withdrew to one side to take counsel among themselves as to what answer they might give. They had thought to embarrass Jesus before the multitude, but now they found themselves much confused before all who were assembled at that time in the temple court. And their discomfiture was all the more apparent when they returned to Jesus, saying, "Concerning the baptism of John, we cannot answer, we do not know." And they so answered the Master because they had reasoned among themselves, "If we shall say from heaven, then will he say, Why did you not believe him? And perchance will add that he received his authority from John, And if we shall say from men, then might the multitude turn upon us, for most of them hold that John was a prophet. And so they were compelled to come before Jesus and the people, confessing that they, the religious teachers and leaders of Israel, could not, or would not, express an opinion about John's mission. And when they had spoken, Jesus, looking down upon them, said, Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. Jesus never intended to appeal to John for his authority. John had never been ordained by the Sanhedrin. Jesus' authority was in himself and in his Father's eternal supremacy.
Okay, so there you have it. Christ turned the tables on them. And you can do the same thing to people who are pious, self-righteous, and determined to have you comply to their will in whatever organization, institution, or religion. Use the scriptures. Use the law. Use that which is already written down to supposedly enforce these people to do what's right. But because they aren't doing what's right, you have the law on your hand. You have the scriptures on your hand. You have these things that have been set down to counter them with. They won't like it. And you know how far they are from what's right when they will fight with you and force you and struggle with you, but they won't have a retort. They won't have a valid retort from the scriptures. They will just once again exercise their authority or show that they have authority, and you don't. That's the truest test of showing that you actually don't have any authority over me or anything else. You just are pretending. You're just a pretender. Let's move on.
In employing this method of dealing with his adversaries, Jesus did not mean to dodge the question. At first it may seem that he was guilty of a masterly evasion, but it was not so. Jesus was never disposed to take unfair advantage of even his enemies. In this apparent evasion, he really supplied all his hearers with the answer to the Pharisees' question as to the authority behind his mission. They had asserted that he performed by authority of the prince of devils. Jesus had repeatedly asserted that all his teaching and works were by the power and authority of his Father in heaven. This the Jewish leaders refused to accept, and were seeking to corner him into admitting that he was an irregular teacher, since he had never been sanctioned by the Sanhedrin. In answering them as he did, while not claiming authority from John, he so satisfied the people with the inference that the effort of his enemies to ensnare him was effectively turned upon themselves, and was much to their discredit in the eyes of all present. And it was this genius of the Master for dealing with his adversaries that made them so afraid of him. They attempted no more questions that day. They retired to take further counsel among themselves. But the people were not slow to discern the dishonesty and insincerity in these questions asked by the Jewish rulers. Even the common folk could not fail to distinguish between the moral majesty of the Master and the designing hypocrisy of his enemies. But the cleansing of the temple had brought the Sadducees over to the side of the Pharisees in perfecting the plan to destroy Jesus, and the Sadducees now represented a majority of the Sanhedrin.
So yeah, as you can see, they do not take kindly to you standing against them and showing them up. And they'll do everything in their power to destroy you or stop you. I have personal testimony of that. I've seen it happen in my life many times. And it's not that you have animosity towards them. You just want the truth more than anything else. And in government too, and especially when you saw with the COVID stuff, when truth would come out, when the facts would come out, they would become more and more vitriol and more determined to stop the truth from coming out. It's just bizarre that way. We just as human beings want to do this over and over and over again. It's not right. We don't have to be that way. We can choose truth over anything else. And that's what I'd recommend to you is follow the Lord, listen to the Spirit, seek for your Father's will in your life. And remember, in the end, if in doubt, do good. Seek for truth. Seek for that which is right, good, and true. Look for that which is right, good, and true. And don't let people sway you into compromising yourself in the ways that they want you to go, because they're just like bad actors. They're just like children in a play group who are demanding you play the game their way. And when you say, well, maybe we can go this way because this makes more sense, they'll beat you down, unfortunately. Well, that's enough for today. Thank you for coming. You take care. Love you.